Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us at this Palestine Chronicle Live. We are here to talk about the world after October 7. Has the war on the Palestinians irreversibly changed the Middle East and global politics? We're going to be joined by a fantastic number of intellectuals and activists who have been writing about this, speaking about this, and very much involved in the struggle in various capacities in their own countries and their own regions. Um, with me right now is my co-writer and the managing editor of the Palestine Chronicle, the ever brilliant Romana. Romana is not just the managing editor of the Palestine Chronicle, she is also the managing editor of Palestine Chronicle Italia, which is the Italian version of the Palestine Chronicle. She is kind of the backbone of our organization, if I am to be entirely honest. She is also a respected intellectual and a media personality. I also have with us, or we have with us, Bouna Mbaye, who is a member of the Pan African Brigades for Palestine, and he's going to be talking more about his work as an intellectual, as an activist based in Paris. And we're going to be discussing some of the changes that are happening in terms of the relationship between Palestine and the global South, which is absolutely central to the struggle of Palestine and the Palestinian people. And we also have, yes, Robert Inlakesh. If you are a regular on the Palestine Chronicle, you must have run to some of his very sharp analyses and videos. He has been a voice that is not only strong and morally founded, but consistent throughout the years and has truly shined in the last year since the Israeli war on Gaza, conveying a message that you would never hear anywhere in mainstream media. Thank you guys very much for joining us. Romana is going to be back here in a minute. Let me just start with Robert very quickly, just a general impression, just to deal with the original question of this podcast. Has a war on the Palestinians irreversibly changed the Middle East and global politics? And if yes, in what ways?
First of all, thank you for the introduction. It's very kind. And I believe, yes, the war has irreversibly changed not only Palestine and the situation inside occupied Palestine, but it's also changed the entire region. We can see now that we're on a different trajectory so far. We have seen that this has escalated now into Lebanon. It's at the level of a full-scale war. Uh, that is what we're seeing now. The Israelis have attempted to penetrate Lebanese territory a number of times. We have also seen that the Israelis have failed to, in the past year, carry on their campaign to normalize ties with Arab regimes in the region. So far, we've seen that Saudi Arabia, despite the fact that just before this, before October 7, was coming closer to normalizing ties with the Israelis. We heard a massive project that not only Benjamin Netanyahu spoke about at the United Nations in September last year, but also Joe Biden bragged about at the G20 summit, which was held in New Delhi, where he said that this is a very big deal. We're going to change the region and set up this India Middle East
Sorry to
corridor.
cut you off, but I think there's an echo. So maybe Ramsey, you need to mute yourself. I think while Robert is speaking
I will do so, absolutely.
about that.
Hopefully that solves it. Okay, there we go. Yeah, just to reiterate for those who are watching that perhaps were disturbed by the echo, we saw that the region was dramatically changing in the way that the United States was attempting to shape it. That was to normalize ties between Israel and nations across the region, pit them against Iran. We heard about what they were calling an Arab NATO, what Netanyahu calls the dream, fighting the nightmare. That is to say that they were seeking to pit the Arab Gulf states against Iran and its allies, whether they be in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, or Palestine, or elsewhere. And so what we saw prior to October 7 was an attempt to completely destroy the issue of Palestine, the Palestine question altogether, and dismantle it. Essentially, and just slowly carve away at Palestinian territory with no real pushback. Now, what we see is very different. There is a battle for not only Palestine, but the heart of the entire region. That's what we're seeing play out now. Netanyahu and the Biden administration, and whichever administration will take over after him, will be pursuing this same strategy to try and normalize ties between the Israelis and Saudi Arabia and build this trade corridor, which will go from the United Arab Emirates through Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Occupy Palestine, into Europe. That is their ultimate plan. That is something as well that they wanted to use to combat China and its Belt and Road Initiative, and to push back against BRICS. So it's even wider than this, what we've seen, the war on Gaza, the genocide in Gaza. And that's why it has been, in my opinion, so incredibly intense, because this is not just an Israeli war, this is a US war of aggression as well. This is about putting not only the Palestinian resistance, but also the Lebanese and all of the nations of the region, but primarily focusing on Iran in their place. That is what this war is about for the US and the Israelis. And it's very clear if you listen to the speeches of Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, that this is their ambition. This is why we see the war expanding. This is why we see the assassinations in Tehran and in Beirut and in Damascus, because this is the general theme. So I believe now we're in a very different region. It is a very different world.
I'm gonna jump in here with a quick point, but I also want to remind everyone that this is a discussion. Everybody can jump in at any moment to make any point. It's not an interview per se, so I want everyone to feel free to do so. I just want to just add something very quickly. Just hearing you say these things, Robert, it makes you feel that this reductionist conversation, that all of this is just, it's Netanyahu's war, and Netanyahu is just doing this to keep his government together so he doesn't go to prison. I mean, I've heard this argument numerous times, and very well respected analysts and academics keep repeating this line. But this is much bigger than a couple of shady characters like Ben Gvir and Smotrich. What do you think, Bouna?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for having me on the program, because I've been following your work, the work that not only Ramzy has been doing, but also Palestine Chronicle. I think it's a critically important work, the importance of which should not be underestimated, especially now that the Zionists have realized how impactful and how important that work has been. They've been trying. I don't know if people who are watching or listening are aware of the attacks that Palestine Chronicle has been under over the past few months, with some pro-genocide, pro-Israel lobbies trying to use once again the dirty tricks that they're using whenever they're trying to discredit and even dismantle, in the case of Palestine Chronicle, the type of work that you're doing. So journalism, the type of journalism that you're doing, is a very important, it's one of the many fronts of the resistance against the genocide in Lebanon and Palestine. So I really wanted to appreciate the work that you've been doing, and also pay tribute to the journalists like Robert and others who've been literally on the front lines. And talking about the front lines, I also wanted to salute the memory, and also pay tribute to journalists who've been killed by Israel in Gaza, in Lebanon. Some of those include Wafa Al-Udaini, who was killed, who was assassinated, I would say, last week, and who was a regular contributor to Palestine Chronicle. Recently, they have also killed a 19-year-old journalist who's been threatened before that. I believe his name is Hassan Hamad. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So I really wanted to insist on the importance of the type of work that you're doing. I hope people will keep supporting it. and support all the resistance, the journalistic resistance to the genocide, because the Zionists want also to control the narratives. Okay, they want to control the minds, they want to control the opinion, which I think has not been successful. So I think we should not. I mean, the importance of the work that you're doing cannot be overstated. After that digression, I will try to respond the question that you asked me. I think it's one of the misconceptions that even some of the pro-genocide people have been feeding, saying that this is the work of a bunch of extremists, okay, who don't necessarily reflect what the Israeli society, taken generally, thinks. But Zionism is a settler colonial project. It's a settler colonial project that is based on the eradication, the mass expulsion, and the destruction of the indigenous people of Palestine. So that, when you make that type of diagnosis, which is not my own, which you can find in many work, including in Ramzy's work, it's one of the core arguments also of Ilan Pappé, who's the Israeli anti-Zionist historian. He makes that point quite convincingly in his book titled "The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine." So I think this is an argument that people who do not really want to deal with the core issues, the core problem of Zionism, are trying to come up with. But I think those who have been under the illusion that what's happening in Gaza is just only an accident, okay? Not only Gaza, but also Lebanon, just unintended consequences of a project that is benevolent. I think those people, whether they're academics, scholars, journalists, or so-called experts, the images that we have seen now coming out of Gaza, Lebanon, show that those analyses should not be taken, seriously, because what everybody can see now, even people who are pro-Israel, I would say, before the genocide, or people who are sympathetic to Zionism as a project, as liberation project, can see now the real nature and the real face of Zionism. So nobody can pretend that they did not know, or they still don't know what Zionism is about. And what is really striking in the development since last year, since October 7, 2023, is that it has shown us that no matter the importance or weakness of international solidarity movement, or no matter the betrayal or the plots of the Arab states against the people of Palestine, just like the our comrade Robert has pointed out, the Palestinians will never be eradicated. So Zionism, as a settler colonial project, is doomed to failure. They can kill tens, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, but the Palestinians have shown us their resilience, that their resistance cannot be defeated on the ground, in Lebanon, and Palestine. So all those people who are still feeding the propaganda, including some so-called liberal Zionists who are telling us that Netanyahu is doing that only for political purposes, or only because he's influenced by extremists, I think this is a narrative that has been totally discredited.
Indeed, Bouna, I think that, not many days in history have changed history and the future of the world the same way October 7, 2023 did, in reshaping the future of a nation who showed that, this nation didn't want to surrender to its destiny of suffering and of oppression. And what Israel expected to be maybe an easy and complete victory, they use this kind of language a lot, especially in the beginning, has turned to be a nightmare scenario where, for Israel, but also for its Western allies, because not only the Palestinian people, as you were rightly saying, have continued to resist and persist, but also the fronts of the resistance have widened. And I think that when I speak about fronts, I'm not only speaking about fronts of the war, which indeed is the case, but also many fronts when it comes to activism. Activism has changed. The intellectual approach to the Palestinian cause has changed. How do you think, both Robert and Bouna, how do you think it changed deeply?
Robert, you want to go first?
I'm fine with if you want to take the
Go
floor.
ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. I believe that we've seen a fundamental change because at this point we've reached critical mass. That's what's happened. Before, there would be, I say, more isolated groups of people um, perhaps the more politically committed, who were going to speak up on the question of Palestine, and not just Palestine as well. We're talking about other causes as well here, because what the Zionists immediately did with the Palestinian cause, and when people started talking about Gaza, is they tried to do whataboutism. They said, but what about Sudan? What about Congo? And what this translated into is like, yeah, what about Sudan and what about Congo? So everyone started talking about Sudan and the Congo as well, and what was happening there. And so people naturally started actually looking into these cases. And we've seen that not only on the question of Palestine, but on various social issues, issues of foreign conflicts, that people are becoming more politically engaged, and that people care a great deal about what is going on a wider scale. Of course, this has been met with enormous pushback. But if you look at just the student encampments, or in Europe, they call them student occupations, they happened across all of these college campuses. Whether they were smaller or larger, they were happening pretty much everywhere. And there were different degrees of crackdowns against them. But the fact that university students in this way had come out and had been willing to put their futures on the line for this cause tells you about what this cause has become. And it has become the cause of a generation. It has become the moral cause across the world. We're not just talking about one or two countries here. We're talking about the entire planet. This has become the moral cause, the standard issue that you have to stand against oppression in, because of how horrific it has been, because of all the images that we see coming out on social media every single day. And this has broken past all of the Zionist propaganda, which has historically, to some extent, worked on a large portion of the population. But when you are bombarded with videos of dead children and journalists and medical workers and hospitals being blown up every single day for an entire year, it's going to radicalize you. And that's what we've seen with the general public, that they've become way more radicalized. They're standing with the Palestinian people in a way that we've never seen before. And even the fact that now it's so open that everyone is using the word genocide. If you go back to 2021, the mention of the word genocide was going to get somebody canceled. They're going to lose their job. And you're going to be the subject of a massive smear campaign. But now, because it's so widespread, and of course, the International Court of Justice has said that this is plausibly a genocide, and they are investigating it as such. We are now at a point where there's no language to describe this, which is off limits. People openly, the genocide label, apartheid, because every single leading human rights organization has described Israeli policies as apartheid. So at this point, there's no denial. The language is now a lot more clear. It's being used more broadly. And I believe that this has helped reach critical mass. And that's where we are at the moment. How that translates now to perhaps changes on the ground is one thing. Perhaps that will be something that we see more long term. Obviously, we have boycott action, which is doing quite well. Just on an anecdotal note, I was sitting and watching YouTube videos the other night, and I saw a Starbucks ad where they're saying that they're donating a portion of their proceeds to World Central Kitchen, specifically to help children in Gaza. And that is a sign that, of course, the boycotts are working and they are actually hitting them, because they wouldn't feel the need to do this unless they know that people are obviously boycotting them because of their stances. So there are some of those consequences there. Of course, companies withdrawing, partly due to, of course, instability from the Israeli side. And, from a business perspective, we are seeing those consequences come, but how this will translate later on, perhaps to solving the issue of the oppression of the Palestinian people, we'll have to see. That's something I don't know how to read personally.
I'm just gonna jump in there, so I can give this the chance to Bouna to go next. But regarding the use of language, because this is extremely important. I mean, we are not fighting on the ground. We have no tools in which we can affect the outcomes of what's happening right now in Jabalia, where they are massacring people in very large numbers, and they just issued evacuation orders for people in various parts of northern Gaza. We can't affect the outcomes there, but our job is that of language. You push new language, new words, and then you kind of you take the fall for it. Sometimes it's very risky, sometimes you pay a price for it, but it's extremely important, because when everybody starts saying genocide, well, guess what, that becomes a new reality. I remember when Jimmy Carter came up with his book, I think it was called Palestine, Peace Not Apartheid, something to that effect, and how insane the Zionists went when they heard the word apartheid, even though he did not say it is yet an apartheid. He's like, it's making its way towards it. But the fact that he would even dare mention that word, there was such a massive campaign to discredit him, calling him crazy, insane. This guy has reported seeing aliens, they said, trying to completely destroy him as a human being. But guess what? Eventually, even B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights groups, aside from Amnesty and Human Rights Watch and many others, are now saying Israel is a certifiably apartheid state. So that's how you introduce a word and it becomes that thing few years later, where the foot soldiers of intellectuals and students and activists everywhere keep pushing and pushing and pushing until it becomes a new reality. So Buna, within your own environment, French speaking world and beyond, how do you see the language? Has the language evolved at the same level as it has, let's say, in the US or Britain or elsewhere?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked your question. And also, it's going to be a response to Romana's question, which allows me to do some self-criticism, because I think that before October 7, 2023, many of the activists haven't been doing, including myself. That's why I say, it's going to be self-criticism. You have been quite weak in terms of maintaining Palestine on the agenda. Okay. I was reading recently an article that was analyzing, the coverage of the colonization of Palestine prior to October 7, 2023. So basically, from 2014 to 2023, including there was some exceptions like in 2021, Palestine has almost totally disappeared from the media coverage, and this is something that we as activists who've been involved in the Palestine solidarity movement for several years have to reflect on. Okay, because if like back in 2021, 2022, we would do some demonstrations. For example, when Shirin Abu Akleh was assassinated, there were few people, but then since the media was not talking about Palestine anymore, there will be even less people. So I think that one of the lessons that we have to learn from October 7 is that we have to maintain Palestine on our priorities, on the agenda, political agenda, whether the media talks about it or not. Okay, we don't know what the outcome after, within the next 5 or 6 months will be in Gaza, whether the media will pay attention to other issues or not. I don't think so. I think it will be still at the forefront of our anti-colonial struggle. But still, one of the lessons that we have to learn from what has unfolded since October 2023 is that Palestine, as Robert said, and I agree 100% with what he said, has to be the anti-colonial cause of the 21st century. Just like when the anti-colonial organizations and movements, when they held their historic conference in La Havana, in Cuba in 1966, the Tricontinental Conference, Solidarity, International Solidarity Movement of Latin America, Africa, and Asia. There were three issues on the agenda. There were many issues, but there were three priorities on the agenda. It was South Africa, okay, the struggle against apartheid, Vietnam, and Palestine. Okay, 60 years later, South Africa has been victorious. There are some issues with the, including, up to today, but the apartheid regime has been defeated. The Vietnam War has been won by the Vietnamese, but Palestine is still colonized. So it wouldn't be an overstatement to say that Palestine has to be the anti-colonial cause of the 21st century. And that doesn't mean that we're not doing, like, some people would call like Olympics of suffering. Okay, the other causes are important, but Palestine will really help us measure the progress of the anti-colonial movement globally. Now, going back to Ramsey's question, I think um, the the resistance to the genocide has also given us more space to tell some of some things that we would not have been able to say even last year. Okay, because like Robert pointed out, the word genocide was taboo. Okay, how can you talk about genocide when talking about the regime that was a state that was founded by people who basically were rescuing genocide? Okay, so this was totally unacceptable. But now the evidence is so overwhelming. The brutality and the barbarism of the Zionist regime is so egregious that it has become very difficult for even the media to type of to censor people who are calling a spade is spade. Okay, people are calling the genocide as it is. Although we also have to acknowledge that despite the fact that we able to say some of the things that we are not able to say last year, there are still attempts by the government, those same government that are funding, supporting the genocide, to crush, to repress the anti-genocide voices. Okay, I would rather say anti-genocide instead of pro-Palestinian voices. And actually, one of our friends, one of our comrades, was held in detention for 48 hours. That was 10 days ago. So this is just a very concrete example, because he said in a public meeting which I attended, I was with him. I talked to him just before. He said that it is time for intifada. you know, say it is time for intifada. So then the French government said, "Oh, this is called. They're calling for hatred. Inciting racial hatred, inciting armed insurrection against the French government." So okay, we said, okay, you don't want to us to use the term intifada, but this is an expression that we've been using for months. Okay, so we say that if you want to, implement hagra, which is a term that comes from Algeria, I think, Arabic from Algeria, hagra, which is a policy of discrimination and repression, not only against Palestinians, but against racialized communities here in France. We say, if you give us hagra, the only solution that we have found, and this solution has been effective in Palestine, is intifada. So we keep using that term intifada, whether you like it or not. We'll keep using that term because this is something that has been effective not only in Palestine but also here. Now, in terms of interpretation, you can define intifada the way you want. You can call it armed insurrection. You can call it, incitement to hatred. But this is a term that we're going to use. And I'm going to conclude by saying that, and here I'm going to quote Ramzy, a fantastic article that he wrote for the Palestine Chronicle, which is titled "Watering Down Genocide," which we are translating in French, by the way, should be published after this interview, in which Ramzy, reminds us that, no matter the price that we have to pay for speaking the truth, the price that we have to pay will never be comparable to the price that the Gazans and the Lebanese are paying right now. So there are some sacrifices that we have to make, no matter the impact, but we have to be sincere. We have to be staunchly and uncompromisingly committed to the liberation of Palestine.
Thank you so much, Bouna. Thank you so much. And now we were joined by Zarifa Baroud. Zarifa is an amazing Gazan American activist and a PhD candidate in Palestine Studies at the University of Exeter. And with Zarifa, we will try to discuss another aspect, which is the centrality of prisoners to the Palestinian struggle before October 7 and after October 7. Welcome,
Great.
Zarifa.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome, Zarifa. Thank you for joining us. You have dedicated basically much of your research, your academic research, but a lot of your work and activism to the issue of prisoners. So the question is, why do you think this issue right now, especially in the last year of an Israeli genocide in Gaza, why is it central to the conversation? Why should we be talking about prisoners right now?
Absolutely. I think over the last year of Israel's genocide in Gaza, it's only highlighted the need to center Palestinian prisoners within our discourse all over the world, not just within Palestine. But this has always been a central component of the struggle for liberation and decolonization. And that's been because most literally our prisoners uh, are the compass and the main agents in the movement on the ground. And that's been shown in the way that Israel has also made central carceral policy within their colonial apparatus across the West Bank and now the Gaza Strip. The situation changed slightly after the disengagement from Gaza, but the reliance on detention of Palestinians from Gaza has just escalated over the last year in a way that we haven't seen before. Just some simple statistics to kind of give some background on the centrality of this policy. Since 1967, at least 20% of all Palestinians have experienced detention, and almost nearly half of all Palestinian men. And I think it's an average of 700 children per year were detained before the Gaza genocide. The majority of them face extreme torture and mistreatment, medical negligence, and things that have just escalated past a point that we've ever seen in the last year as well, which only further highlights how these systems are in place to not only degrade, but to hinder the movement and the cause that these Palestinians represent. This is mostly done through either the military court system, which is a bogus court that produces a conviction rate of 99.7%, and can warrant a child, if he throws a stone and is found guilty of throwing a stone in one of these courts, could warrant a 20+ year prison sentence. And then the other aspect of this is the subject of administrative detention, which we've seen more. And I think even past administrative detention, because I mean, in the case of Gaza, administrative detention requires orders to be issued. In the case of Gaza, just rounding up people en masse and inflicting mass disappearances on the people of Gaza. Adamir actually just released a statement, I think 2 days ago, saying that while we have a rough estimate of the number of Gazan detainees, which the total number of detainees since October 7th is around 10,000 or upwards of 10,000, we have no idea how many are from Gaza, and we have no idea how many prisoners have been martyred in these prisons either. So the level of the Israeli prison authorities have the prisons and detention centers and the internment camps sealed in a way that they haven't ever before. So a lot of the information that we could rely on in past years and consistent reporting, even coming from the Israeli prison authorities giving us this information, we don't have that anymore. So, I mean, I think it's around 10,000 Palestinians in Gaza are currently missing. We have no idea how many of them are either killed and missing under the rubble, or how many of them have been swept up in these mass arrests. Yeah, so it continues to be a central facet of not only the occupation, but of genocide.
Now, Israel has, the Israeli prison system has always been kind of existing in total separation from reality. The international community, international organizations have had very little access to what Israel does. They tortured the Supreme Court. In the beginning, allowed torture of Palestinians. Then they kind of changed the regulations a bit. Where they kind of whitewash their image slightly by saying, well, torture is not allowed except in the following cases, and so forth and so on. So we know that Israel kind of always existed outside the realms of what is right and what is acceptable per international law, especially regarding the treatment of prisoners. And I'm referring to the Fourth Geneva Convention on the subject. But it seems to me that what has been going on in the last year goes even beyond anything that Israel has done in the past. I mean, this celebrating the rape of Palestinian prisoners and making the rapists heroes. This is new. Where do you think this comes from?
I think you're absolutely correct in that assessment. I mean, my doctoral research has focused on the first Intifada period and the treatment of prisoners during that period, but also during the Great Revolt in the 30s. So kind of looking at the conditions and the subject of imprisonment and detention under two different colonial regimes. And as brutal as the British were in Palestine, they were extremely brutal in other places. Kenya is one of the primary examples of the extent of their brutality within their carceral systems. But as brutal as they were in Palestine in particular, I have not read or seen anything close to the extent of brutality and extremism that I've seen in the last year with the reports. And again, emphasizing that there's so much that we don't know yet. The horrors that we've been exposed to so far are just the tip of the iceberg. We don't even know how many people are detained, let alone what they've been experiencing. We don't know the stories of every person that's been killed in detention, what kind of torture they've experienced. We've just seen snippets of it here and there. But I think Israel's genocide in Gaza generally is an indication of the fall of an empire. And I think that that's absolutely manifesting itself in the treatment of prisoners and detainees as well. Especially, again, because detainees, I don't particularly like to just use the term hostage when it comes to Palestinian prisoners, because it kind of insinuates a passiveness. Some of them are completely uninvolved in anything, just children, women, men swept up in military operations, but some of them are absolutely involved in military operations. And so they represent, and the Israelis are fully aware that Palestinian prisoners in general represent the heart and the compass of the cause on the ground, and are honored as such by everyone in Gaza. For example, one of the Palestine Chronicle's amazing correspondents from Gaza, Wafa al-Daini, despite being in Gaza, being under siege, not really having that connection to prisoners in the same extent as maybe someone in the West Bank would, Palestinian prisoners was central to her discourse and to the young people around her, even if they didn't personally know a prisoner, as someone in the West Bank more likely would over the last few decades after Israel's disengagement. And that's recognized. And I think that's why Palestinian prisoners in particular, historically and now, are facing the brunt of a lot of this brutality.
I'm very glad that you raised this issue, the centrality of prisoners to the Palestinian discourse. And before I give the chance to my co-hosts to kind of jump in and to comment or ask questions, it's important that we make this particular remark that prisoners in the Palestinian collective psyche is not a human rights issue per se. I mean, it is, of course. And what Israel is doing there, it's a total violation of international law and human rights conventions and all the rest. But this is, for us, is not just a human rights issue. The Palestinian leadership in all of its manifestation, be it political, be it in terms of actual resistance on the ground, be it in terms of popular resistance, it's actually in Israeli prisons as we speak. So they do this, the Israelis do this because they feel that by removing thousands and thousands of the best that Palestine has to offer in terms of leadership, kind of makes our society quite orphaned, that we have nobody to turn to in times of need, when we need guidance, when we need inspiration. But what they don't realize, that the more they do of this, the more they create yet another generation that kind of ends up fulfilling the mission of these prisoners, and they end up being, they end up taken to prison as well, and it's a cycle. It just keeps going. But the connection between Palestinians in prison and Palestinians outside prisons is not just that of a subject of Israel's violating human rights of Palestinians, but there is something much more important and much more central in their understanding and interpretation of why Israel imprisons Palestinians. I'm going to give the chance to my co-hosts to jump in if they have anything to add to this.
One thing perhaps I'd like to add is on the British and what they did when they were occupying Palestine, and specifically in the 1930s. I know there's a good book, I think it's called Pacifying Palestine. I forget the author's name, which runs through some of the examples of what the British did. And for instance, these cases of gang rape and using metal objects was committed by the British. I remember that was something that really stuck out in that book for me. But the element to this, which I think we haven't perhaps seen before, is the fact that we have an Israeli society, which a large portion of it, at least, according to polling data, and of course the how it's acceptable in Israeli media to endorse it, is the fact that you have so many people defending it. Despite video evidence of it, it's not just rumors about different human rights violations and horrifying acts being committed against prisoners. We have straight up evidence of it, and then we have such dehumanization from the Israelis that on a societal level, whether it be in the government, the military, the settlers, on the television networks, that it is acceptable to discuss whether it's all right to commit these sort of acts, which I think is sort of a massive anomaly. If you look at the Algerian case, when the French public realized the massive torture, there were actually protests against it, not inside from the settlers who were there in Algeria, but at least the French actually came out and protested the torture. It was okay killing so many people for them, but the torture for some reason was a step above in the Algerian case. So I think that at least stands out as an anomaly for me, the level of dehumanization where we have got today and how we have reached this point. And I'd be interested to know, because my understanding of the British and their prison system is actually quite limited to just a few books. So if there's anything else that can be added there, I'd be really interested to know about how that correlates and how that is tied to today as well, and the abuse of Palestinian prisoners today.
The book that you're thinking of is The Pacification of Palestine by Matthew Hughes. It's a fantastic book. I completely agree with your assessment on this. Is actually the primary subject of my thesis. Unfortunately, it's a very dark subject, but I think another differentiating point between the use of detention and torture with the British and that of Israel in occupied Palestine is the sheer numbers and the extent, also the longevity of the Israeli regime. So under the British, they faced it for nearly 3 decades and endured it for nearly 3 decades. But for Palestinians now, the technology and the tactics and the strategies have been able to evolve over nearly 80 years. And so that's just been a whole other beast. And also the subject of the British being a colonial regime and the Israelis being a settler colonial regime predicated on elimination. So I think the use of torture and the use of death and social death in the context of torture and detention is another kind of differentiating factor between the use of detention during the mandate versus the occupation. But again, I think that there's so much more that would need to be assessed after the war is over, after the genocide is over, and we start getting a clearer picture of what's really going on and what's really occurred in these detention centers.
Thank you so much, Zarif, and thank you, everybody. And I just, want to say that there are many questions, so we will try to address these questions even with our guests. For example, one commentator said in the beginning, the Zionist entity must free the Palestinian hostages. And this has been, one of the changes in the language because it was impactful. But after Zarifa's note, he said, so prisoner implies more a political and militant agency than the term hostage noted, he said. So yes, of course, the prisoners have been at the forefront of this struggle since day one. And, even before everybody was starting speaking about dehumanization, we noticed how the Israeli regime dehumanized Palestinian prisoners since the moment of their arrest to their arrest and detention, to their trial, and even in the way mainstream media portrayed them. As, of course, perpetrators or victims, no human agency involved. So thank you very much, Zarifa. And my last question is, how do you think the issue of Palestinian prisoners is going to contribute to the changes we are implementing after October 7? Because, our discussion is, how is October 7 changing all of this? How is the prisoners issue also be central in this strong change that we're witnessing?
Absolutely. And I think it's not even a niche issue in this conversation. When we're talking about the subject of prisoners, again, these people, most of them have been central within political movements, within social movements, within community organizing. So when we're looking at a leadership post-October 7th, we know exactly where to look. And the Palestinian people know exactly where to look. And there's historical precedence to this as well. During the first and second Intifada, it was the prisoners themselves dictating a lot of the political strategy happening on the ground. But once they're all released and liberated, and even otherwise, they will be true representatives of the Palestinian people and of the movement.
Thank you so much, Zarifa, for being with us. I know you're very busy, but you took the time to be with us, and we really appreciate it. And now I see that Yves Engler from Montreal is connected. I don't know if he's ready, but we would like him to join our conversation. Yeah. So dubbed Canada's version of Noam Chomsky, one of the most important voices on the Canadian left, Yves Engler has 12 published books. His latest is Stand on Guard for Home, A People's History of the Canadian Military. And Yves Engler is also a regular contributor to the Palestine Chronicle, so we welcome him and we add him to stage. There is an echo. I don't know if everybody's muted. Ramzy, maybe you want to mute yourself.
It's always my problem.
So I will add. Thank you, Zarifa, so much for being with us. If you want to stay with us, we're more than happy to address questions at the end. And welcome, Yves, to our discussion.
Thanks for having me.
Yves is one of the first. No, I'm so nervous about this whole echo thing. Like I try to talk really fast and mute myself. I don't know what else to do about it. But he was one of the first people that we interviewed when the whole Zoom thing became a thing, and he is a regular contributor to the Palestine Chronicle, offering a perspective that is truly unique, but also he takes his activism to a whole new level. I mean, he doesn't just confine himself to just writing about the subject, but he stands out there and he confronts politicians with their moral accountability to the public, and so he inspires us, and we very much happy to have him as a central part of our narrative at the Palestine Chronicle, but also in the movement at large. Romana.
Yes, I'm very much interested. You know, the latest article that Eve published on the Palestine Chronicle is titled Billions of Dollars in Public Subsidy, Pro-Israel Charities Flout Tax Laws with Seeming Impunity. This is a very important topic. Like, we have seen how Western powers are basically giving a lot of tax money to organizations which basically support the genocide. So what is the situation in Canada? If can you, highlight what the situation is and explain to our readers what is important to do even in terms of activism?
Well, in Canada, I would say it's probably the most significant contribution to Palestine dispossession. And what that is there's more than 200 that give registered charities, which are able to provide tax receipts. So when someone donates, they can basically, the taxpayer covers about half. It depends on the tax bracket, maybe even more than half in some instances of the donation. And there's 200 plus, probably a fair bit more than 200, but we know of more than 200 that assist different projects in Israel all across the board. So every Israeli university has a Canadian Friends of Hebrew University, Technion, etc. There's also, we know of dozens and dozens of these groups that assist the Israeli military in one way or another, that assist colonies in the West Bank, and that assist racist organizations, and that assist Israeli municipalities. So all of that, according to Canadian charitable law today, is illegal. That contravenes Canadian charitable law to assist Israeli military, West Bank colonies, racist organizations, or government agencies in Israel. And so basically, it's this huge wealth transfer of probably minimum of $280 million a year, but probably close towards $500 million a year. Approximately half of that would be subsidized by the taxpayer. 2 projects in Israel, and so we've been campaigning on this. Principally, Just Peace Advocates, Karen Rodden, Just Peace Advocates, for good 3 years now, and we've detailed like so many of these charities, mainly Just Peace Advocates, and submitted complaints to the Canada Revenue Agency to ask for these charitable organizations to have their charitable status revoked. It's a similar dynamic in the U.S. It's probably billions of dollars being raised annually in the U.S. and same thing in the UK and many other countries. Recently, we've had a couple big successes. Most notably, the Jewish National Fund of Canada had its charitable status revoked. That's something that's been campaigning around for decades. Another major organization, the Neiman Foundation, they also had their charitable status revoked. And another group, the Eminem Fund, had its charitable status suspended. All of those in part because they support the Israeli military. So it's a big element of the overarching support for Israel, and it's a campaign that I think is really important. First of all, because it's a way of stopping the wealth transfer, this huge wealth transfer. Israel has a GDP per capita equal to Canada's, right? So why is Canadian charities not supporting projects in France or in Sweden or in Japan? So it's a unique dynamic of this wealth transfer subsidized by the taxpayer. It also has, so we want to undercut that and, weaken Israel, in that way. But also there's an ideological element to it, which is the pro-Israel forces. They all frame themselves as like the victim and Israel's being, unfairly targeted. But in fact, it's being unfairly, or it's being targeted in a unique, subsidized way. Again, there's no other wealthy country that receives this kind of wealth transfer from charities. So it's been an ongoing campaign, and it's one piece. We've been able to force it onto the agenda a little bit into the sort of corporate media, the mainstream kind of agenda. Certainly within the Palestine solidarity world, it's becoming more and more widely kind of understood how important part this is of Canadian support. And we've been campaigning, and I just came back. I just actually biked back quickly across town, across Montreal, because there's a big student walkout at Concordia. They're just rallying now. There's probably 500 people already rallying, and I think it's growing. So there's been tons and tons of mobilization here in Montreal. This weekend there was 1,000 people on Sunday. It was a bit more than 5,000 on Saturday that demonstrated. There's a number of actions. There's another demonstration later tonight. So there's lots and lots of campaigning. I've never seen a more intense popular uprising on any international issue in 20 plus years of organizing on, you know, different international and left-wing issues that we've seen over the past year against Canada's complicity in the Holocaust in Gaza.
Thank you very much, Eve. You know, for a long time, Canada has been perceived as, you know, a more amiable country than America in terms of foreign policy. And of course, that was, you know, completely false, as demonstrated by many evidence. And it turned out that Canada actually is one of the power hubs of the pro-Israel Zionist lobby and all of that. So it kind of took me by surprise myself, honestly, when, in fact, when we reported, Romana, on the Palestine Chronicle that the Jewish National Fund of Canada has lost its charitable status, I said, it could be fake news. Can you please verify that information? And then Eve sent us that article. It's like, oh, okay, well, if Eve is writing about it, then it has to be true. So the question is, how did we get here from a country that has embraced Zionism and Zionist organizations to actually going as far as, you know, having important organizations lose their charitable status? What was the process, in case others want to duplicate that process elsewhere and learn from your experience?
Yeah, well, let's be clear. This is a 40-year-long process. So this goes back to Ismail Zaid, who was a Palestinian driven from his home in '67. And then the JNF Canada built Canada Park on the village where he was driven from his home. And so he when he learned about this in the late 1970s, he started, you know, kind of raising the alarm. And then that literally instigated a decade-long process. I mean, here in Montreal, I've been aware of pickets at the JNF galas, the annual Negev Fund fundraisers, going back to since I've been in Montreal, 25 years now. And so there have been pickets going on. And if you look at what's happened internally, we don't know the full story internally, but there's actually quite a bit of the internal documents that have now come out. And the Canada Revenue Agency had audited the JNF going back quite a while and multiple times. And basically, the JNF Canada was lying would be to what they were actually doing to the public versus how they were framing it to the revenue agency. And I think with the essence, like, there's a bit of a debate going on here because there's some people who really try to depoliticize what's happened to the JNF. And I think in essence, they were lying about what they were doing, because what they were really doing is funding the JNF Israel, or KKL, I forget how you pronounce it, but the Israeli branch of the JNF, which of course is a explicitly racist organization, which is part of Judaizing of both in the occupied West Bank, but also within 48 Israel, and so. There was, but okay, alongside this sort of campaigning in a kind of general sense, and lots of complaints to the Canada Revenue Agency, kind of, I would say, somewhat informal complaints. There was, about 7 years ago, there was a very formalized, legalistic complaint submitted to the Canada Revenue Agency detailing how the JNF was contravening the laws, the existing charity laws. And, I'm of an opinion that all of these Israel charity should just be eliminated. There's no reason we should be subsidizing, but operating within the existing rules that exist for all charities, it's illegal to support any foreign military. It has nothing to do with Israel. It has nothing to do with the crimes of the Israeli military. It has to do with just a nationalistic Canadian policy that, well, we have our own military. Charities can assist the Canadian military, but they can't assist any foreign military. So they in this legal submission, they detailed how the JNF Canada was supporting the Israeli military. They detailed how they were operating the West Bank, which again, it contravenes Canada Revenue Agency rules because it's ostensibly against official Canadian policy, which Canada officially, not in practice, of course, but officially says that's occupied territory, contravene Israel's colonies are illegal according to international law, etc. And so they detailed all this, but I think at the I think what's going on behind the scenes is that within the bureaucracy of the Canada Revenue Agency, which is supposed to be a somewhat independent of the government, we have, there's a lot of things going on. First of all, I think there's a all the student activism that's taken place at the universities, particularly in Ottawa, Carleton, and University of Ottawa over the past 20 plus years, most of these people, these bureaucrats at Canada Revenue Agency, they went to those universities. So they've kind of been exposed to the Palestinian issue through that mechanism. Also, of course, over the past year, you have this popular uprising, you have International Court of Justice rulings, you have a whole kind of mix of things that I think basically meant the sort of seeps into the bureaucratic decision making. I don't believe this was a political decision. I don't believe it was not the Liberal government saying, hey, let's get rid of the JNF Charitable House. The JNF actually, they've come out and they may have violated lobbying rules. They admitted themselves, they had what they call off-the-book meetings with the Prime Minister on this matter. The Prime Minister, Trudeau, has attended JNF galas. The former Prime Minister, Harper, was just at a JNF gala couple days, 2 different JNF galas, just a couple days before they had their charitable status formally revoked. Many ministers, all kinds of very powerful business people, politicians who've been attending these JNF galas all the time. So I don't think it was a political intervention. It was more that finally the Canada Revenue Agency actually followed their own rules. And why they followed their own rules, I think it's because of a mix of all this activism going on around the, outside, this very formal kind of legal push, and rulings of the International Court of Justice, and eventually all that put together, and they just basically formally, followed their rules and revoked the charitable status. And the JNF is incredibly angry. The JNF is just absolutely appalled. They're the impunity in which they think they can operate, right? They were just so crass in their disrespect, honestly, for the CRA, for the revenue agency. They basically just see themselves kind of as above the law. And a lot of these charities, it's not just the JNF, a lot of these Israel-focused charities have been operating that way. And there's a real sign now that's, they're still way too permissive, the revenue agency, but there's a real sign that they are on top of this sector. And again, it's credit to the activism of people like the very diligent activism of Just Peace advocates, Karen Rodman, all kinds of people challenged Ismail Zaid going back 40 years with the JNF Canada Park, and a countless number of other people who've been challenging these issues.
Thank you so much, Eve, for staying with us, for taking the time for this interview. I don't know if Bouna or Ramzy have something else to say. And meanwhile, I would also like to, welcome our next guest. And I have to say that I'm really happy to have very young people tonight, because I really think this new generation is playing an amazing role, a huge role in, reshaping activism, reshaping the way we discuss Palestine. They are bold, they are courageous, and I really like their content on social media. And speaking about content on social media, we
Perhaps
have...
very quickly, just in case, I think Bouna might have had a remark.
Yeah,
You don't.
Yeah, just very quickly, I wanted to ask Eve, but I think he left already. He's still here. Because he talked about the military, the support to the military. I had a question very quickly about the Canadian citizens who are involved in the genocide, basically. In the Israeli genocidal forces, the IGF. People talk about IDF, but I call him IGF. And what does the Canadian law say about that, and how that law is implemented? I mean, those people will be coming back to Canada having committed war crimes and genocide. So I was just wondering if you had, some information on what the Canadian law says about those who enlist in the IGF, and also if the same measures that you described are being implemented against charities who are funding the genocide are also targeting the Canadian citizens who are involved in the military forces that are committing this genocide.
Yeah, well, so there's two things on that with Canada's. Canada has something called the Foreign Enlistment Act, which I understand a number of countries has. Canada's initial version comes out of the British, then it was updated in the 1930s. And the Foreign Enlistment Act says it's illegal to induce someone to join a foreign military. And we have, back in 2020, we had a campaign. We launched a campaign on this, got people like Roger Waters, Chomsky, many prominent international and Canadian figures to sign this public letter where we detailed a number of different groups in Canada, the consulate in Toronto, some of the Jewish Federation here in Montreal, others that were basically inducing Canadians, right? There's one school in Toronto, private school, where they say a quarter of the graduate students, a high school, they go to the Israeli military. A quarter of the kids from a Toronto school end up and there's a whole bunch of ways in which the school basically induces the kids to do that. And so we did a campaign. We actually got it on the front page of the Le Devoir, a leftish kind of daily paper in Montreal, and forced the minister to just sort of remove the issue, deny sort of responsibility, say it's a policing matter. So we then pursued it. We actually had a whole. We got a judge essentially to accept a case of a private prosecution because the police wouldn't actually take the matter up properly around this group Sarel that brings volunteers to the Israeli military. And then the Crown actually intervened after a judge had okayed the case to move forward. Crown intervened and just kiboshed the whole thing. A pretty egregious violation of sort of following the law, really. So we didn't really have success in pushing that. Now, Canada has the War Crimes and Crimes Against Humanity Act. And we know there are almost certainly hundreds Canadians fighting right now or, last year in the Israeli military. And there's been a push to have the Justice Minister instigate an investigation under this War Crimes Act. But there's just no political. I actually had one opportunity. The Justice Minister was here in Montreal, and I caught up with him at this conference, and I asked him why, whether they're going to investigate. It was actually really funny because he really didn't want to answer. He just stayed silent, and he ends up walking down the wrong hallway to try to avoid my question, which looked quite embarrassing on this video. But basically, there's just silence on the matter, right? They don't want to touch it because they don't want to touch it for all kinds of reasons, because they support Israel, because they know there'll be a backlash from the Israel lobby, because just even raising the matter of Canadians potentially, fighting in the Israeli military, violating it, just totally embarrassing to the pro-Israel forces in this country. But there are efforts. I know there are some legal efforts in the works to try to force that hand of the government on the issue. But how the legal system works, it's it's not exactly structured for challenging imperialism and the government on this matter. But yes, there are Canadians fighting in the Israeli military. There's a whole network that induces Canadians, probably in violation of the Foreign Enlistment Act, certainly in violation of any moral act. And there is legislation that's been on the books for more than 20 years to prosecute Canadians involved in war crimes. But it's basically a refusal from certainly the political echelon, and thus far from any kind of policing or legal echelon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eve, for this. And thank you for giving us some of your time. I know that you said that you were at a protest, and I'm sure most likely you're going to end up going back there. But thank you for joining us, and I'm sure that we'll be talking to you again in one of our podcasts.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to give it to you, Romana, to introduce our next guest, Anisa. We are very excited about having her. I think you might be mute.
The importance of social media in this struggle, the way it helped also circumvent censorship. I mean, we all know that we are heavily shadow banned every time we speak about Palestine, but in the same way, these young content creators were able to find ways to circumvent this, these prohibitions and these bans, and to help, discuss about Palestine in a creative way. And regarding this, we have an amazing young content creator and activist, Anissa Mahmoud. On social media, we find her actually as the Palestinian princess. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Anissa, can you talk to us about your experience and the ways you created, to raise awareness on the Palestinian cause throughout this 12 months of genocide?
So over the last few years, I've started to kind of create some videos about Palestine and purposely trying to combat Zionist propaganda that I was seeing on the app. That for a lot of young, whether it's Americans or people around the world that are seeing from Zionists, again, this propaganda, they might believe it. So I started making videos, again, just combating that, saying why that's misinformation, why it's propaganda. I actually was supposed to go to Palestine for the first time near October 7th, and obviously that did not end up happening. But I was over in the Middle East, and as soon as I saw what was happening on October 7th, I took out my phone, I recorded a video, and I said, it's really unethical journalism if you are discussing what happened in Palestine today to not include the fact that Palestine has been under a 76-year illegal occupation and 16-year siege, specifically in Gaza. So I just kind of started making videos from there, and they started gaining traction, and just kind of pointing out how what Zionists say, it's not believable anymore. And they can't just keep spewing this propaganda, especially when we are having access to Palestinians that are on the ground. So when they say things like, we do not target civilians, we can pull out our phones and see children being pulled out of the rubble. We know that that's not true. So my main goal with my social media platform over this past year has really just been to educate people about Palestine, because I know that education is power. And I know that I've been able to educate so many people, and I'm so incredibly grateful for that, because so many people now know about Palestine through social media, and not just about the genocide over this past year, but they're learning about the Nakba. They're learning about the importance of the kafia and how that's an act of resistance, and things like the watermelon, even something like spoons, how that can be used. So I think my main goal, I guess, with my social media, has just been to educate about all things Palestine and to show the beauty of who we are and how it's harder to dehumanize us when you know us and when you know about us and our culture and our people.
Anissa, were you surprised by the kind of reaction that you've generated? I mean, some of your content and videos have millions of views. Were you surprised by that reaction when you first started?
I was definitely surprised. I think there were a lot of times where I had gotten really overwhelmed because a video had gone very viral. And due to going viral specifically about Palestine, that means a lot of threats coming in as well. So I'd received a lot of threatening messages from Israeli soldiers, saying that they want to kill me, saying that they want to rape me. So some things like that, where I kind of at some point wanted to take a step back, but I was also like, this is what they try to do. They try to threaten us. So I just tried to use that as motivation to kind of go even harder and make more videos. But I was definitely surprised the traction that a lot of my videos had made, specifically one about like Hind Rajab that had over 1 million views talking about what had happened to her. So the fact that like CNN had referred to her as a woman, this little 6-year-old Palestinian girl, people are now hearing the real story about what had happened to her and how she deserves justice.
I do have another question for Anissa, but I just want to give space for Bouna and Romana in case you have something you would like to say about this.
Yeah, very quickly. I do have a question. First of all, I'd like to thank and congratulate Anissa for the incredible work that she's doing. And yeah, regarding the threats that you've mentioned, of course, we fully support you against those threats, which are not very surprising. I have the impression, but this is maybe because I'm overexposed to, anti-genocide content. Okay, but I have the impression that in terms of narratives, in terms of propaganda, the pro-genocide forces have been defeated. Okay, despite the censorship that is affecting people like you. You haven't talked about censorship, but I guess it is something that's affecting your own work. Despite the censorship that has been imposed on anti-genocide voices, and also despite the fact that you have forces within the Israeli genocidal forces that are dedicated to the propaganda on social media, I have the impression that they've been defeated. But I don't know how accurate that impression is, because I feel that whatever type of narrative they come up with, it always end up being discredited. Don't know if you remember, it was at the very beginning of the invasion of Gaza when they invaded the one of the hospitals. I don't know if it was Al Ahli or another hospital, and when they actually planted some weapons, and even the Western journalists were saying that Israelis were lying. So I don't know if it's just an impression or if your exposure to the Israeli propaganda also reflects the fact that they are so desperate that they end up threatening people because their narrative has been defeated.
I think 100% that they feel so threatened. I think with the fact that there are so many Palestinians now in Palestine that have these huge voices, and also Palestinians around the world that are able to share what is happening, what has happened to our families. So I think it just shows that they use threats when they also don't have really anything solid to say, that they don't have anything to back up that their claims or anything that Palestinian activists and stuff are saying. So I think that's why they resort to threats. And I think it's very clear to them as well that they are losing in that sense. When we talk about things like propaganda, people are just simply not believing it anymore.
It is a sign of desperation indeed, all these threats and all this. What I really like about this generation is that I think that they are implementing what Antonio Gramsci used to say: educate yourself, agitate yourself, organize yourself. And you are really doing that. Anissa, do you have some advice for young people on social media who want to spread the truth and maybe do not have the tools, the practical tools? What is your basic advice?
I think my basic advice for anyone who wants to start advocating is just start doing it. Even if you don't know a lot, you don't need to know the ins and outs of the history of Palestine and the occupation of Palestine to know that genocide is bad, to that occupation is bad. So I think if people want to just start spreading that of just, I know that this is bad and let me start looking into it and let's do some research together. That is something that I've also tried to do on my page, is educate myself because I also don't know everything. So if I see something online, I will then go and do research on my own. So I think it's really just spreading the message, follow Palestinians that are on the ground, and even accounts like Eye on Palestine where you can just see what's actually happening. And then from there, yeah.
Just one last thing I'd like to say. When I first came to Seattle many years ago to study at the University of Washington, um, we used to attend these meetings, Palestine solidarity groups meeting, and there was always a complaint that there are not enough young people involved in our movement. Where are the young people? We always measured our success or failure. I was young at the time, but I was like kind of the exception, coming fresh from Gaza. But the question is, where are the young people? And we measured our success or failure based on our ability to appeal to this young generation. Now you go to events, you go to protests, and you're like, where are the old people? I mean, this is suddenly has become a youthful movement. And I think social media played a big role in it. But from an intellectual point of view, it's absolutely critical to have a youthful movement, in the sense we are now going, we are driven by the kind of energy that is absolutely unstoppable. Anissa's generation and people like her who have managed to actually, whether they are aware of it or not, they actually have managed to reverse the gains made by Israel through their control and influence over mainstream media. So hats off to you, Anissa, and to your generation. If anyone else would like to say something, including Anissa, please go ahead.
I guess I could just add that I think despite the censorship, it just shows how many young people do support Palestine and are advocating. Because like for my accounts, I have been banned off of TikTok, for instance, multiple different times, and I receive strikes on my accounts. I will have audio taken out that I've made. But despite that, and despite the censorship on TikTok, on Instagram, on X, on Facebook, the movement has just spread, and I think that resonates a lot with young people. Of we will not have our voices silent and we will not be complicit in this genocide. And I think that really goes to show the power in the people and the power in young people, and specifically within Gen Z in this movement.
Thank you so much, really, for being with us, for taking the time, and for giving, your insight into the matter. And now I also see, Anita, if you want to stay with us, we are more than happy to have you. And meanwhile, I see that Professor Jeremy Salt has joined us. I'm really happy to have Professor Salt here. Also, Jeremy Salt is a regular contributor to the Palestine Chronicle. He taught at the University of Melbourne, at Bosporus University in Istanbul, at Bilkent University in Ankara for many years, specializing in the modern history of the Middle East. Among his recent publications is his 2008 book, The Unmaking of the Middle East, which is a really important volume that, I really advise everybody to read. And I would like to start, Ramzy, if you don't mind, with a question, starting by an article that Professor Jeremy Salt recently published in the Palestine Chronicle, which is called The Start of a New Beginning, Gaza Shakes the World. In which way Gaza is shaking the world following October 7 events, Professor Salt?
Oh, hi, Romana. It's nice to see you and Ramzy, and to see the others whom I haven't met, but now I can see your faces at least. Well, I think to begin discussing this from my point of view, we've now reached a point that we were always going to reach from 1948. We were going to come to this situation, which has the appearance of being some kind of final confrontation between the active Arab world and Israel. And if it's not the final one, well, there will be another one to come. So Gaza was deliberately designed last year, the attack across the fence, to kind of tip the balance and to stop the stalemate with things moving in directions that which were very clearly designed to close off the Palestinian question and to close it out, and to reach a settlement between the Gulf states and between Israel, from which the Palestinians would be excluded. And it was going to be the end of the Palestine question. That was the design. And so the attack across the fence last year had the specific purpose of breaking that. Of course, it was in the name of Al-Aqsa, and it was in the name of the whole history of Palestine and everything that had happened, particularly since 2005. So Gaza was the beginning of what we're now seeing has led on to this kind of very, very dangerous situation, this tremendously dangerous situation. And just tonight I was reading that last night there were 30 bombing attacks on Beirut, on Dahir, just on Beirut, 30 large-scale bombing attacks. And if you look at the skyline, it's totally apocalyptic. It looks like something out of the Blade Runner. It's totally dystopian. You can't believe this is really happening to the capital city of a country, and the world is sitting back and not only kind of not doing anything to stop it, but are congratulating the state that's actually doing it and telling the state how smart it is and how wonderful it is, and because of what it's done to destroy Hezbollah and all the rest of it, and all the civilian casualties somehow are not noticed. It's quite, and I've never in my life, and I'm much older than any of you, I've never seen anything like this. And it takes me back to the 1930s, when the European states were appeasing Nazi Germany, because Israel is committing the most shocking crimes, the worst I've ever seen, and it's being appeased by the US and all its allies, these governments that are sworn to uphold the conventions and laws that we've developed for 2,000 years in the Western culture, have been tossed into the gutter. So they have no importance. And I think this is causing a very peculiar sense in the minds of people very far from the scene. I mean, what are we all about as a species if we've got this far and this is what's happening? What are our institutions worth? What are our laws worth if the people we elect to govern and represent us can allow this most appalling crime to continue without lifting a finger to stop it, and by actually doing nothing, enabling it, and even worse, by providing the arms so that it can continue. So anyway, so back to your question, Romana, Ramzy kicked off this particular phase of the long-running confrontation between the Palestinians and the supporters in the Middle East and overseas. Goes back to Arthur Balfour. It goes back to Herzl. There's no indication in the Western media coverage. This is how long it's been going on. And if you look at in detail at the history, it's been going on every single day. It's not as if the Palestinians were kind of, taking action 1 month or 1 week and then dropping it for a while. This has gone on for more than 100 years. It must be one of the longest resistance struggles in the world. This is not even in the picture for the West. All the West thinks about is October the 7th. What's your reaction to October the 7th? These TV compares and hosts. And it stuns me, quite frankly. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about October 7 very quickly, Professor Salt. I mean, you're writing throughout the years, and I've been following you for a long time. And of course, we have been privileged to run many of your pieces, if not all of them, on at least the journalistic components on the Palestine Chronicle. While others were focusing on something else and talking about something else, you've always seen that there is a bigger plan. Israel had a bigger plan. There was an American-Israeli conspiracy, if you will, aimed at controlling the Middle East per the old neoconservative diktats, whether in Syria or in Lebanon or Palestine, the normalization, the breakdown of the old orders, the creation of a new order, and that sort of thing. Did October 7 challenge all of this? And if yes, to what extent?
Yes, it did challenge it. And in fact, it highlighted the role of the West all along, since after Balfour. Because at that time, it was Britain, the main imperial power, that kicked off this whole situation in Palestine and kind of dominated it for, 20 years, until it could no longer stay in Palestine. That's why it left, because it couldn't afford to stay any longer. It couldn't hold on to Palestine. Then the baton was passed to the Americans. The Americans took the lead, followed by Britain and followed by all the other Western states, big and large, including Australia, of course, all the way. And so this has been a Western operation in one form or another for more than 100 years. And what Gaza has done has thrown into high relief the Western role in supporting Israel, whatever it does. You might remember the quote by Golda Meir, the Israeli prime minister, so-called, after in 1967. And she said, after the Holocaust, we can do anything. And that's precisely what we're seeing now. I mean, is this how it's going to be, that Israel really has license to do whatever it wants, and this is going to continue without anyone stopping it? No, I mean, who is going to stop it? I mean, Israel is rampaging across the Middle East. It's running amok. It really is. I mean, there's no other way of putting it. When they've totally destroyed Gaza, they are totally destroying Beirut. They are bombing all over Lebanon. They're bombing everywhere where it's hard to conceive of a Hezbollah presence being there. Like I saw the other day, they bombed a village in the mountains behind Beirut called Kaifoun. Well, I lived in Beirut in the 60s, and I lived near that village. And there's no conceivable way in which this is a Hezbollah stronghold. It's kind of a mixed religious area. It's mainly Christians and Sunni Muslims and Druze. So why are they bombing? What is the point? What's the point of all of this bombing? Why are they bombing villages? Why are they destroying village houses? Why are they bombing agricultural land? I mean, it's something going on in their minds that I have trouble coming to grips with. But that's what's going on. And the West is doing nothing to stop it. They're just making noises. Like we have this, this is a terrible situation. Too many civilians are dying. Well, how many civilians do you think should die? This is disproportionate violence. Well, what would be proportionate? I mean, the lips, the words coming out of their mouths, just this fluff. But they're not actually doing anything to stop it, which they could do. They could at least, like in Australia's case, they could suspend relations with Israel. They could do something as simple as that, but they're not doing anything. They're effectively supporting it. Like I heard Tony Abbott, who is the former or a leading Australian conservative politician in the opposition party, congratulating Israel the other day on how smart it was and how clever it was. Well, Mr. Abbott, haven't you seen what's going on? That's the other thing. They all know what's going on. They can see it as well as we can. And any person with a conscience, with any morality, would be absolutely horrified. Absolutely horrified. So why is it that they apparently are not? I'm trying to understand their mentality. Is this all about politics? That they have to behave like this because the Americans or Israel wants them to? Maybe in their private moments they have different thoughts, but in the public arena, they're all behind Israel, whatever Israel does. It's a very strange phase we've reached in human history. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah. I mean,
if Robert or Bouna have any questions, and there is also a question from one of our of the people who are following us saying, if you could please discuss Hezbollah current standing militarily, also Lebanon, will people stay united? So maybe both Robert and Professor Jeremy Salt can address this.
Robert, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I'm more than happy to go first. In terms of Hezbollah, evidently the pager and walkie-talkie attacks were a significant security breach. They're evidently having to recover from that, militarily speaking. However, and of course the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, but not only Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, also that's the Secretary General of Hezbollah, but also the leadership of the Radwan forces and the missile unit and many of the other senior leaders in Hezbollah's military wing. So evidently there has been a hit, which has been, let's say, scored by the Israelis against Hezbollah. They are having to recover from that. That's very obvious. They've admitted it. I don't believe it can be denied. But at the same time, these are sort of point scoring victories for the Israelis, which use crass terrorist tactics in order to exact a price on Hezbollah, but also their supporters and family members. We have to understand that Hezbollah in the United States and in many Western countries is considered a terrorist organization, but inside of Lebanon, it's the largest political party. It has seats in the parliament, and it functions as any normal political party within the Lebanese state. And so Hezbollah is, I believe, the second or third largest employer inside of Lebanon. So Hezbollah employs many people. It has people that are working within its ranks in its political sphere who are simply, medics or performing aid work, for instance, and these people have been collectively punished. And that's the problem when we hear that Hezbollah is described as a terrorist organization. Many people think that Israel's attacks on quote-unquote Hezbollah members and alleged terrorists are attacks on people that are fighters, and that's not necessarily true. We see, for instance, the pager attack. Many children had picked up these pagers. We saw medics who had these pagers and were killed or seriously wounded. Hezbollah itself right now, its military capabilities, I don't believe has been touched. No one can know. However, it is fighting. It doesn't seem that its ability to prevent the Israelis from crossing the Lebanese border has been in any way touched. The Israelis have been attempting for a week to penetrate Lebanese territory. Every single time they have failed so far. Hezbollah now seems to be it appears anyway, to change its tactics and to attack different kinds of targets. So we are seeing an escalation in that regard. Evidently, I don't believe that anyone outside of a closed circle inside of Hezbollah would know what their military capabilities still are, how badly they've been affected, how command and control was affected, for instance, by the actions that the Israelis have carried out. But one thing I believe has to be noted is that Hezbollah is not like the PLO before in the 1970s and 80s. You cannot collapse them by taking out a few senior figures, and they're a lot more well prepared than the PLO and the leftist groups that were fighting out of Lebanon there. Even when it comes to their political leadership, there are tens and tens of other potential figures who could emerge and fill the gaps in the political sphere to replace leaders like Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. And then there are, generations and generations of fighters who have been well prepared, trained, and are ready to take on the task. So its standing is still that it's a very powerful organization. Evidently, blows were dealt against it, and it's now recovering. I think the real question is, how far are the Israelis prepared to take this invasion? How will this escalate? A lot of it does depend upon where the Israelis want to take this. At the end of the day, Hezbollah is somewhat responding to what the Israelis are doing and attempting to defend Lebanese territory on the ground. And they're not the aggressor in this sense. So it is a very complicated situation. And perhaps this can be taken on further from here. That's what I would add about that in terms of analyzing what we've seen in the past few weeks with Hezbollah.
Well, I think it's we all know that Hezbollah has been preparing for this moment for years, militarily and politically. And politically, as we know, that each important senior figure in the leadership was required to nominate someone to take over from them if they were killed. And one would assume that this probably goes down quite a distance, the top level, the second level, the third level. There's always someone ready to move into to fill a position that's been vacated because someone's been assassinated. So I think those positions already would have been filled or will be in the process of being filled. Now, in terms of the military capability, we've heard for many, many years that Hezbollah has more than 100,000 missiles of various kinds stored away somewhere. And that's been so consistent, I would believe that it's probably true. And Hezbollah has maintained these salvos aimed across the armistice line into Israel. Hasn't done much damage. It mainly has attacked military sites. There have been some attacks on civilian settlements, but the missiles have been small. I kind of think that's probably calibrated, that Hezbollah is not using its bigger missiles at the moment. It's waiting until there's a really big confrontation. In terms of the actual fighting, I think it's a very strange situation on the armistice line in the north, because Israel has now been there and said there was going to be a ground invasion, 10 days ago, something like that, a week ago, whatever. And there's almost no reports coming out from Israel about damage and what they're doing. To me, this is an indicative that something's going on. They don't want to tell us. And the story we're hearing, of course, from the other side is that Israel's taken very significant casualties, which it's not admitting. Well, the last figure I saw was something like 25 soldiers being killed, many, many people being wounded. And it seems they're having a great deal of trouble penetrating the border region. They just can't do it on the ground. And so they've called in what they've always done. They've called in the Air Force. So the Air Force kind of bombs the hell out of the village, and then the ground troops feel safe to move in. But what they're accomplishing by that is not very much, as far as I can tell. They're destroying village houses. And there was a propaganda film the other day of weapons they'd seized, and honestly, it was enough to make me, well, I wouldn't say laugh, but it was kind of like a kitchen table. And there was an assault rifle, one, and there was some kind of cartridges of ammunitions, and there was a hunting rifle, like a 22, that like a village granddad would take out of the hills to shoot a rabbit or quail. And this presented as part of the arms catch they've confiscated from Hezbollah. So none of this is very convincing. Now, we've heard also just recently that Israel has built up its ground forces on the border, sent another brigade, another unit. And people are saying, well, this possibly means that they're going to really push as far as the Litani River, maybe. But it could also be an indication they just can't penetrate the border. And so they're pumping up the number of soldiers in an attempt to kind of deal with Hezbollah. But at the moment, it seems they have just not got across they've hardly got across the border at all. So, and the fact that there's no great victories are being reported by the Israelis, to me, gives weight to that. And as everyone says, and Mohammed Morandi has been very good at this, he was in Beirut recently and saying, look, Hezbollah's missile sites are all underground. All their important missile batteries are underground. They're well hidden, concealed in the mountainous region of southern Lebanon. The Israelis can't get at them. It might be true, might not be true. I tend to believe it is true. So I think my view is that Hezbollah, generally speaking, is holding its ground. And Israeli claims that they've destroyed it based on the assassination of the leadership, based on the carpet bombing of Dahir. Well, so you destroyed a lot of buildings. You killed a lot of people with your carpet bombing. Well, great. Is that your victory? Killing children, killing men, women, and children when you bring down these apartments. Something else the West doesn't really take much notice of. They bombed this building to get a Hezbollah leader. Did they get him or did they not? We don't know. But what we do know is that dozens, hundreds, we don't know how many, because the West is not really interested, of civilians were killed in these attacks. And that leads me on to the last point I'll make, which is that the Israelis would be delighted if the Lebanese fell against each other, went for each other's throats, like the Maronite Christians, the right-wing Maronite Christians, saw an opportunity to strike down Hezbollah, and there was fighting in the streets, and we had something approaching a civil war situation again. They would love that. But there's no sign of that happening. And possibly one of the reasons is that the indiscriminate bombing of Israel is killing everyone. It's not just killing Shia, it's killing anyone who happens to be in their way, in southern Lebanon, wherever they drop these bombs. And so the evidence I'm seeing is the Lebanese people, despite everything, are sticking together. They're not splitting up into kind of sectarian factions. They're supporting each other. So, which is at least a positive sign in a very terrible picture.
Thank you very much for this, Jeremy. I visited South Lebanon last few years ago, and one thing that I wouldn't say I was shocked by it, but it definitely registered in my mind, is the idea that this kind of culture of resistance, and I do remember writing about it back then, is that, the way that the media tries to talk, or they constantly talk about Hamas and Hezbollah and others as if they are alien groups coming from, I don't know, outer space and imposed on the local populations who are, caught in crossfires and that sort of thing. But when I went to South Lebanon, I felt that we are talking about the same experience of Hamas and other Palestinian resistance groups in Gaza. They are very much part and parcel of that society. They are rooted. You see their culture manifest itself in the way that people talk, the way that they celebrate, the way they sing, even the references they have to their little children. They call them, I think Ashbal or something like that, a reference to the lion cubs of the resistance. It's not a fleeting phenomenon. They are not a group of wanderers who just happen to settle in South Lebanon and Israel's going to kick them out. And that kind of leads me to my final question is, so it seems that Netanyahu is escalating and escalating, escalating. Every time he fails, he escalates some more, but he is fighting against a group of people who literally cannot be defeated, not because they are superhumans, although if you look at Gaza and South Lebanon, you would think that they might be. But it's because it's not possible to uproot people who are resisting as a matter of culture, people who are so rooted in their resistance to that extent. It's not the matter of just defeating few legions and then the war is over. So what kind of victory is Netanyahu searching for while he is fighting an enemy that cannot really, under these circumstances, be defeated?
Right. And I think it's another point to be made here is that, let's say that this war against Iran goes ahead in some form or another. And let's say that Israel comes out of this battered, but kind of, quote, victorious. What is the point of living in Israel? Because Israel will never be forgiven for what it's done, I don't think, in Beirut and in Gaza. I can't see forgiveness ever coming its way after this. I think this is the end of the road for any possibility of Israel settling into the Middle East as a state which can have neighborly good relations with other states. I think that's finished. So what is the future of Israel after all this, what Netanyahu is doing, this crazy kind of mass killing and mass destruction across the central lands of the Middle East? What is Israel in the long term going to get out of it? They're hated, right? And what I find interesting also, feeding into this, is that I read articles where the Israelis don't seem to understand it. This is just anti-Semitism. They just don't like us because we're Jews. But excuse me, you could hardly have done anything more to make yourself loathed across the Middle East. What you've done is so appalling. What are you talking about? Anti-Semitism. I'm sure that's true as well. But what you've done in the Middle East is so shocking. It will never be forgotten. It's entered into history. It'll be a marker in Middle Eastern history 2,000 years from now. It's not going to go away. So that's what Netanyahu has saddled Israel with. No more negotiations, no more peace plans, no more anything. He's launched this kind of ultimate war to destroy all of Israel's enemies at once. But look at the consequences. I mean, if you're Jewish, why would you want to live in Israel in that situation? Why would you want to live in a region where you're loathed, right? Why would you want to be in a country which has done this, which won't be forgiven for it? So, the logic here is very hard to understand. Yeah.
Romana?
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Falt, for being with us tonight, taking the time, but especially, for regularly contributing to our platform.
Absolutely, and I think we need a whole separate podcast just with Jeremy. I mean, this is we have so many questions, and indeed, it's very, very interesting.
Well, I told you, Ramzy,
I wait for his articles to come in the email because I'm eager to read them. So I really wait for his articles every time. So
I hesitate to appear to speak, but I'm not very good at it. I get very nervous. I'm not a good public performer. I prefer to write, to hide at home with my pen and scribble away in the dark. Anyway.
But you were amazing even, in this role.
Yeah,
so thank you so much.
Okay, Romana and Robert.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to see all of you. Yeah. So see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night.
And now we are more than welcome to have with us Bouna Mbaye, who is also a regular contributor to the Palestine Chronicle. And, Bouna is an amazing academic author and activist. She contributed many pieces to the Palestine Chronicle, always dealing with many topics from anti-colonial struggle, even because her kind of activism is very connected to the struggle of, the native population in the United States too, and also the recentering of the Palestinian narrative, the Palestinian voice. So we're really happy to have Bouna with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ramzy. Do you want to ask something to Bouna, and maybe then Bouna can take it from there?
Absolutely. Bouna, I've been reading your articles in the Palestine Chronicle for a long time. And you write from a unique perspective. But you also witness the horror, like the rest of us, this genocide in Gaza, day in and day out. Have you seen that there is something that has been fundamental in terms of the changes happening politically, in terms of solidarity with Palestine and the Palestinians? Where do you feel hopeful? And if you do, where is that source of hope coming from?
I think my source of hope is in Palestinian resilience. What you say, Ramzy, over and over again is that you can't defeat an idea. You can, and Kanafani said that too, that bodies can fall, but you can't kill an idea. And Israel will never be able to kill the resistance, ever. I live in New Mexico, which is the home to many native tribes. I live across the street from 66 acres of Pueblo land that's been developed in the past couple of years into hotels and restaurants, but still the presence is there at the cultural center. They have dances at least once a week. I can hear the drums. Even though they've been fairly well integrated into the society, they've never been defeated. They're still here. And at least, I don't know, in the past 10 or 15 years, and probably before that, but I've seen a growth in solidarity between the Navajo and the Pueblos and the Apache and Palestine. There have been delegations that go there. So I've seen a rise in that too. And the student movement here, there hasn't been a Students for Justice chapter in many years. And now this year there is. And they staged a walkout today. So, I mean, the last time that I saw a lot of political action at the University of New Mexico was, and it was probably in the 80s with South Africa when I was in graduate school. So I think all of that, it gives me hope, because you can't do this work without hope. I mean, there's no point.
I'm going to push my luck here, and I'm going to ask another question without giving you guys your fair share. It's just because you wrote about the indigenous struggle and the similarities between the Palestinian struggle and that of indigenous groups, especially in the United States. The idea of intersectionality, it's we've been talking about it a lot in academia. And for me, if something exists in academia, doesn't necessarily translate to anything tangible until it's embraced by grassroots societies. Now you go to here in Seattle, every protest is like the main constituency comes from Native Americans, and not just presenting themselves or just being there physically, but they speak, and they speak with knowledge, they speak with pride, they speak with true understanding that what is happening in Palestine is very similar to what has happened to Native American groups and indigenous groups in this country. Do you feel that we are at the cusp of seeing the indigenous peoples actually creating and formulating common struggles? And where does Palestine fit into this?
Well, I hope so. Stephen Slater was really, I think, he did a lot of work. He's written 2 books on this issue, and we both kind of lost our jobs at the same time for the same reason. And that's when I met him. And that's when I started being more interested in the commonalities between the two. There are a lot of differences, but I think there are a lot of commonalities. And I mean, that's been there for quite a while. I don't see it as new, but I know what's going on in Seattle because I have some Native friends there and a Navajo friend who just moved there to work on the Spokane Nation with addicted children there. And so I see there, I see in California, and certainly in Canada too. I'm a member of Sami Dune, and in Vancouver, Sami Dune works very closely with the Native population in Canada. So yeah, I see this not just in the United States, but also in Brazil and with the tribes there. I have a few Palestinian friends in Brazil. We have a Sami Dune chapter there, and they also work with Native people. There's a lot of commonalities, and I think that people feel much stronger when they see that other people share their history when they work together.
Absolutely. And yesterday we were, talking with Bouna about that, like how after October 7, particularly, it seems that the borders, of the Palestine, of the activism, the pro-Palestine activism, have widened even more, and it's more clear that it's not just only an Arab issue, but it's also an anti-colonial struggle. So maybe Bouna wants to address this even from his point of view in Europe, in France, and from his perspective, from his angle.
Yeah, thank you, Romana. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm very glad and pleased to meet Binay virtually, because I've been reading her articles on the Palestine Chronicle, obviously, for several years. I did have a follow-up question, linked to what you've just said, Romana, and also what Binay and Ramzy have discussed regarding the, well, I wouldn't say intersectionality, but the how the struggle in Palestine is reverberating on the settler colonial countries in North America. I was talking to Gerald Horn recently, professor of African American Studies at the University of Houston, longtime activist, anti-apartheid struggle, and he's written actually, at least three books on settler colonialism in North America, and some of the ideas that he came up with 10 years ago were not acceptable, including to some sections of the left. Okay, but he said that one of the impacts that the struggle in Gaza and Palestine generally had was that some debates that were confined to Palestine are now reverberating in North America. Like people now, including the left, are talking about the U.S. as a settler colonial state, which was unthinkable for many activists a few years ago, including on the left. And my second question, don't know, we don't have much time left. That's why I'm speeding up. You've written an article on George Ibrahim Abdullah, who is one of the longest, oldest, if I'm not mistaken, political prisoner in Europe. He's been detained for 40 years now, since 1984. He should have been freed since 1999. So he's been detained, for 25 years now without any legal basis because of the pressure from the U.S. and Israeli government. So I wanted to ask you if you can elaborate. I know don't have much time, but the significance of his struggle of George Ibrahim Abdullah, who is the longest serving prisoner in
he
France.
works. The struggle to free him is also very close to Sami Dune, which I'm a member of, and I think that his next trial is November 15th. And I was asked to write that article because the film had just come out about him. I think that he's very important because he has so much integrity. He could have been freed if he had repented, if he had said, gee, I'm sorry, I didn't really mean to do all this, and I'm not really a communist, and so on. But he wouldn't do that. He said that he has no faith in the courts, in the European courts, and he won't even recognize the judicial system. And that's extremely inspiring, that somebody can remain in prison when he could be free. He does a lot of organizing in prison too, certainly not just for Lebanon, but also for Palestine, because he considers himself part of that liberation movement. He's still very strong, and people go to visit him. The woman that he was very close to just died. So I think that was kind of a loss. But I know that the campaign is working very hard for his freedom.
Yeah, thank you for that. Actually, there was some people were saying, the justice system in France, they did it on purpose, because October 7 was the day he was, there was a hearing today about his release, and the October 7, I don't know if it's a coincidence, but it was today. And like you said, the decision will, final decision will be released on, will be taken at least on November 15. And the person that you mentioned is Suzanne. She passed away, I think, 10 days ago, or even less than that. And I'm very close to Sami Dune here, France. Our comrades. We're also involved in the.
We probably have mutual friends.
Yeah, I guess. I think so.
I think it's important to really mention the importance of the work of Sami Dune. They are very courageous in many ways. The way that the work has spread globally, kind of creating a discourse, a political discourse on Palestine around prisoners. So therefore breaking away from what we were discussing earlier, the issue from being that of, as we discussed with Zarifa, breaking away from the issue of prisoners of being a human rights subject, purely just a human rights issue, to that of a political issue. And I think they've made massive contributions on that front. I think we are reaching the end of our podcast. If Romana, if you have anything else, anyone else would like to add, please go right ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to read very quickly, a statement from one of our inspirators, one of our mentors, Amilcar Cabral, who is, one of the greatest anti-colonial fighters of the 20th century, who was killed in 1973, a year before the independence of Guinea-Bissau that he fought for. He came to the international fore in 1966 at the conference of solidarity movements of Asia, Latin America, and Africa, so the Tricontinental Conference. So in 1965, and this is also a reminder to our Pan African comrades, those who are attached to the legacy of the likes of Amilcar Cabral. Just wanted to read this, statement that he made. It was actually the opening statement of the Conference of National Organization of Portuguese Colonies in 1965 in Dar es Salaam. So Amilcar Cabral said on that day, we are with the refugees, the martyrized refugees of Palestine, who have been tricked and driven from their own homeland by the maneuvers of imperialism. We are on the side of the Palestinian refugees, and we support wholeheartedly all the sons of Palestine, all that the sons of Palestine are doing to liberate their country, and we fully support the Arab and African countries in general in helping the Palestinian people to recover their dignity, their independence, and their right to live. And in 1968, I'm going to conclude by that. He said in an interview to the Tricontinental Journal, he reaffirmed his support, uncompromising and staunch support to the Palestinian struggle when he said that we have a basic principle, the defense of just causes. We are in favor of justice, human progress, the freedom of the people. On this basis, we believe that the creation of Israel, carried out by the imperialist states to maintain their domination in the Middle East, was artificial and aimed at the creation of problems in that very important region of the world. And finally, Amilcar Cabral said in the same statement, this is our position. The Jewish people have lived in different countries of the world. We lament profoundly what the Nazis did to the Jewish people, that Hitler and his lackeys destroyed almost 6 million during the last World War. But we do not accept that this gives them the right to occupy part of the Arab nation. We believe that the people of Palestine have a right to their homeland. We therefore think that all the measures taken by the Arab peoples, by the Arab nation, to recover the Palestinian Arab homeland are justified. So this is from Amilcar Cabral, one of our greatest ancestors, not only in the Pan-African struggle, but in the anti-colonial struggle.
Thank you so
Thank you very
much.
much for that, Bouna. For years we've been arguing at the Palestine Chronicle that Africa is absolutely central to the Palestinian struggle. And for years we've been traveling. I've been to several African countries in which I spoke to people, politicians who've been telling me, Ramzy, you're asking us not to normalize with Israel, to boycott Israel, while your own leadership has basically normalized and doing all these things. So that kind of old political discourse has been defeated. I think Gaza has defeated all of this. Gaza is now back as a global on the global agenda. It's back in the hearts and minds of people all around the world, and it's back as an African struggle as well. Because let's remember that it was the African countries that actually pushed for the UN resolution that recognized Israel or Zionism as a form of racism. It was Africa that started the conversation on that. And it's now Africa that is taking Israel to the International Court of Justice. It's absolutely inspiring to see countries like Namibia raising their voices, speaking out, along with South Africa and many others. And of course, countries in the global south, Colombia, Nicaragua, Bolivia, Venezuela, Cuba, and many, many others. It's beautiful to see Palestine back at the heart of the global agenda and among the people that have provided us with that kind of our strategic depth, for the lack of better word. They are now the ones who are now championing the Palestinian cause. And I thank you all so very much for playing your part and for reaching literally millions of people through the Palestine Chronicle in the last years, numbers that we would have never even dreamed of. People are sick and tired of mainstream thinking, mainstream media, mainstream deceptions and lies, and they are seeking alternative voices. And I'm very, very proud of all of you for being those alternative voices and for continuing with this intellectual fight for Palestine, for Gaza, and to end the war and the genocide. So thank you very much, and to all of those who have joined us. And hopefully we'll be back again soon with another podcast.
Yes, thank you so much. And if I can add something, Ramzy, just quickly, this was maybe the best way to commemorate October 7. We are literally, filled with pain for what has been happening throughout this year. We have lost many contributors, many friends of the Palestine Chronicle, which is our family in a sense. And we are in deep sorrow every time we have to report about the sad news. But this was the best way because it was also a proactive way. We really, truly believe that there is the pain, but there is also the resistance and the resilience of the Palestinian people, and that this is shaping a new reality. And we are glad, to be on the front line of the media war to push this new narrative as much as we can. So thank you, so much to all the friends of the Palestine Chronicle, and thank you, thank to everybody who, stayed with us for over 2 hours. The audience actually increased, so we're very happy. And, as Ramzy said, we will organize one more podcast very soon. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.